Thirsty. Are we good?
Sure.
Okay. Well, then we're good. Thank you guys for all coming. I appreciate it. It's nice because now I know everybody who's in the room. And it's wonderful. Thank you to the Hanf Museum here in Berlin for coming in and supporting and for helping me with the book launch party. I wanted to do something special around this, and I was here 2 years ago in Berlin, and I had a special visit that time as well, and I got to come here and I got to speak about medical cannabis. And during my few days after I spoke with a group of medical professionals, I got to come to the Hanf Museum, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was really a beautiful little museum, and it really touched my heart with the history that it holds, because there's so much about this because of prohibition that's not normal history that very much should be. So I'm very touched and very pleased to be here and happy to donate books to the museum, and I'm thrilled to just be in Berlin. So thank you very much for that. And so the Survivor's Guide to Medical Cannabis is a new title to an old book. In 2015, I wrote a book called the ECS Therapy Companion Guide. And ECS stands for Endocannabinoid System. And I still explain that far too often. But shortly after I put out this book that provided dosing to patients, I started getting feedback. People would email me after they had read the book and engaged in cannabis therapy. And many of them told me that being able to access my book and information really helped them survive. And so I ended up coming up with the Survivor's Guide to Medical Cannabis, because I think that that's the real key, is that cannabis can help you survive and have a better quality of life. It is not necessarily a miracle cure, but it is amazing the things that I have seen this plant do. And so I travel the world and I educate people about cannabis and about the endocannabinoid system. And in America, I've been teaching classes this year to medical professionals that have been accredited through the American Academy of Family Physicians. And I only say that to say that I'm the first in their history to have certified classes on the endocannabinoid system. And I find that really very much a shame, because we discovered this system 30 years ago. And it's a very important part of the human body. It's an endocrine system, like your hormones, dopamine, serotonin, your pituitary, your adrenal glands. I hope some of those things translate well. But the thing is, it's actually over all of those things. So it's like your super endocrine system. And so now that we know more about this, I think that it should be just cannabis should just be another tool in a doctor's tool belt. They should just expect that this might be helpful for many people for a wide variety of reasons, from lowering blood pressure to helping people lose weight, and interestingly, it can gain weight. We know we have the munchie factor, but that said, people who use cannabis, though they consume more calories, typically have leaner frames. But we see a lot of people now that we have regular medical programs in the United States who are very obese when they start cannabis therapy, and they're very surprised at how much weight they lose, because they feel better, they become more active, and they think more consciously about how they eat and their diet. And as we spoke about earlier, they often connect with meditation and a higher power and just find a better quality of life in general, though that's not always the case. I've never had anyone tell me they regretted coming to cannabis therapy. Typically, they just wish they had tried it sooner. And with this book discusses the endocannabinoid system. It talks about the plant and many benefits that come from the plant. And then it talks about ways to use cannabis. And as you're going to see soon here in Germany, we've made many, many new ways to use cannabis besides smoking. So if someone wants to use cannabis therapy but they don't want to smoke, they don't have to. And if they don't want to get high, they don't have to. If they want to get high, they can. And the truth is, even doctors say, for patients who are chronically and terminally ill, getting high is a good thing because it gives them an opportunity to step back away from their illness and have some rest and relaxation and some better perspective. So we can't always say that having euphoria is bad. It can be very good. And we're also starting to see, beyond the medical practices, I'm very happy to start to see the proliferation of the hemp plant more into things that are displayed in this museum from earlier, looking at building materials and fabrics and packaging materials. And starting to see those things come. I know in the next few years we're going to start to see more and more of these things, and I think they're really important to us as human beings trying to live on a planet that needs to be sustained and healthy. I think this plant is very important to that. I think that's why it was placed here. So from my perspective, it's nothing but good that we're continuing to see growth and improvement in our laws in many countries. And what I appreciated when I came to Germany 2 years ago was that the physicians and patients were very interested in learning more here, particularly how open the medical practice was to learning more about this, because we often don't find that in the United States. We have a different type of healthcare system, and many patients often find closed doors. And I got to talk with a lot of doctors who found this to be very interesting and a good tool in the toolbox. So with that, I hope that, I guess by doing this to help encourage Germans to learn more and share more. Hans works with a nonprofit here, and I've offered additional books to them for patients that are working with them, because we find this in America too. Sometimes the cost is out of hand and people need to read and understand before they're willing to try it. And so I find a lot of people tend to get my books to give to their mom or their grandma or a friend that they're worried about, so that they understand that this just isn't about getting high. This is about really healing yourself from a lot of different ways. So with that, I want to thank you again, but I also want to offer the opportunity for anyone to ask questions. Sven asked me a question earlier, and I'd be happy to take any more on myself or on medical cannabis or hemp or anything that you'd like to ask. Does anyone have questions? It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm here and I'm happy to sign books for you if I haven't already. I would love to make sure all of you, even the ones that volunteered, would have a book when you leave.
Is there any hope of your books ever being translated into German?
Do you want to translate one? I had someone talk to me about Spanish and other languages. I'm hopeful that yes, in the next few years that I can do that. But I also run a nonprofit, so it's been kind of a budget thing. But I'm looking at ways to be able to do that, and I've been talking with a group who can do that through a software system, and then I still want somebody to check it out. So I think we're trying to get there. With my nonprofit, I run a nonprofit in the United States called the ECS Therapy Center, or the Endocannabinoid System Therapy Center. And we are working this year to help develop sign language around cannabis and hemp, because that's not language that exists within many of the communities. They talk about using marijuana, but they don't. If you're talking about a child or you're talking about your grandmother, that's not necessarily maybe the right sign. And there is no sign for endocannabinoid system. Okay. And so I'm a social scientist. And a patient, not a medical doctor. And on the social science side, how you change society is through language. And we're talking more about cannabis and not marijuana, or using slang terms because we're talking about the plant. But in helping deaf people have the right communication tools for this, it pushes at the medical establishment, their nonprofits that help them, and others to learn more about the endocannabinoid system and the use of cannabis as well. So that's a project we're doing that will be released, and that information will be free on our website and able to be used globally. Yay.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So can you explain in very easy words what is the impact cannabis have on human body, on the psyche, on the nervous system, so that everyone understands that, not only a medical professional?
Yeah. Well, it can have many effects on all of those things. Well, again, we have this endocannabinoid system, and we actually make our own cannabinoids. THC, like is in the plant, we make anandamide. And anandamide is your body's own THC. CBD, we've been hearing and talking a lot about, and there are a lot of stores here in Berlin that I'm seeing that carry cannabidiol or CBD, and it's another cannabinoid that can have effect at a cellular level in your body. So when you get hurt, and let's say you cut your finger, when you first cut it, it gets really red and it gets really swollen, it gets inflammation. That is a CB1, or cannabinoid receptor 1 response. When it starts to heal and that inflammation goes down, that is a CB2 receptor response. So when you get hurt, whether you get sick, your body needs balance. Illness takes you out of balance, and the endocannabinoid system's goal is to bring you back into balance. So it can work at all sorts of levels in your body, just depending on what your specific needs are at the time. Did that help?
Thank you.
Good question. Other questions? I know not all of you understood that, but you have the book. We can translate. We can talk. I have a translator. We can talk one-on-one too. And I'm going to be here for a while visiting and having coffee and tea with you guys and making sure everybody has books.
I have a social problem.
Yes.
With I'm a patient, medical patient here in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting a problem with my friends, with the people I'm getting in contact till now. We're using cannabis together. I'm getting isolated because I'm using my medicine, so I don't share anymore. I'm losing the ability as a human to share. And it's not only, it comes when I'm using it, it comes automatically in my consciousness, and it's in action after a while. I don't know how long, I'm not a scientist, but it is a reality. So, yeah, I think we're losing this.
Yeah.
And I'm getting in a problem because I have my box.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Well, you do.
The
I think
people
it
are
becomes
looking
that
at
thing because it's not really affordable to share when you're if you're using it casually with friends, you can afford to do that. But when it starts to become medicinal and you're using it consistently, I understand that. I have had very tight times, and it can be very difficult to that. I think some of that is you learn more, and you have to talk to your friends about why that's important, why you can't share, and if they can't understand that, are they really good friends and family? But it can be difficult. I think what I appreciate, I like this here because it's a community. I love to see places like the Hanf Museum having events where people can come together and learn and connect with other patients, because I think that's the problem we have in the United States is we don't have any social clubs or any place like that. You go to a dispensary, you buy your medicine, and then you go home, and you can't really use it outside of that either. And so I try to do educational events and other things so people get to know each other, so they start to understand, oh, I can come and visit with you. I can bring my medicine, and I'm good. You have yours, and you're good. And we can share information and other things, and occasionally share medicine, but not like casual smoking friends. It's different. The relationship with the plant changes too, I think. I think people talk about medical and recreational use, and I don't think there's medical and recreational use. I think there's casual use. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's no big deal. But when it's medical, it's because you're focused. You figure out what you need to do to feel better, and then you make a regular routine of that. And you pull out the tool that you need when you need it. And I think that's focused use. And it's different. And
Comes out of therapy after.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that change around this over time.
Well, I have a lot of friends over 60, and they are prone to sicknesses like MS or Parkinson or cancer or something like that. And they were raised and are very law-abiding. And I offered it to them, but they wouldn't eat it. How to overcome this hesitation?
Yeah. Well, I think education is part of it. And again, I have a lot of friends who will give the book to their friends so that they'll read it and understand. Part of it too, I always start people who don't want to use it with topicals that you rub on your skin, like the lotions and salves and balms, because they feel so good. They just take your pain away and they don't get you high. And so over 60, most people have aches and pains, and that's where I start a lot of people. But sometimes people will use it and sometimes they won't. If they won't, you can't force them. Yeah. I have a lot of people who tell me, I'm just going to give my grandma a medicated cookie. I'm like, oh, don't do that to your grandma without telling her. You have to tell people so that they know what's going on. Yeah. But that's a good question, too. Other questions?
I would like some, maybe some kind of a story about a patient. For example, I had this good friend in Iceland. She had cancer on the last stages. And we were trying to get some cannabis in Iceland. And it was impossible. And she was afraid of it because she's an addict. And she hasn't used for 30 years or so. And she was hesitant to try it. And then when she finally overcame that, because it was, it was the only thing she could imagine would help. We didn't get any. And for her it was about the appetite. She couldn't eat. And she was waiting, for it to end in a way, and really feeling terrible. And I would just like to know some life.
Yeah. Well, I tell my own story a lot, and I can tell tons of patients' stories. I think when it comes to talking about cancer, though, I see so many people go through such rough time because of the conventional treatments. They're very sick at their stomach. They waste. You mentioned wasting. And I deal with a lot of issues along that kind of same route anyway, and it can be very painful. But I had a grandfather come to me a few years ago trying to help find cannabis oil for him, because even in Colorado, it's still difficult to find enough cannabis oil if you're trying to treat a cancer patient. And that's reliable, that's credible, from a credible source. But his grandson passed away, which happens. He died of pneumonia during the treatment, but he'd been using the cannabis for a couple months. And the grandfather came back to me 2 months later, and he said, I've just found out I have cancer. And I have been through cancer with my grandson, because his grandson had, when he was a little boy, found out he had brain cancer. And they'd been through several treatments. He was now 16. He was 16 years old when he died. But the grandfather goes, every time he'd been through treatment before, we thought he was going to die every day. No one would leave, we would never leave him alone because we were so scared that he would die at any moment. He was so sick and he was in so much pain, and it was just constant. Once we started giving him the cannabis, he seemed okay. And he goes, when he died, he had gotten pneumonia, and he'd been taken to the hospital for that because it kind of went along with some of the chemotherapy treatments as a thing to watch for. But when they were laughing and talking, and his grandparents were going to go out to eat, and he said, Mom, Dad, go with them, because they would never go together. They always wanted to leave somebody with him. And they did, because he was laughing, and he was happy, and he hugged them all. And he died while they were going to dinner. And he goes, if I have to die, I'd rather die like that. And that, I think, is to me, though it had a sad outcome with the boy, it saved his grandfather's life that next year. His grandfather doesn't have cancer. He's lived longer. He's been more of a help to his daughter, who's lost her son. But it is that thing of, as someone who was opposed to his grandson having this, he saw, and he couldn't argue with what he saw. His grandson seemed to feel better, look better, laugh. He was like he hadn't laughed in years. And so those kind of things, I think, are the important things. Again, it's not about curing the cancer. It's about somebody having a good quality of life while they're going through a healing process or a dying process. We all die. I'd rather people die comfortably. Thank you. Yeah. Other questions? Other things? We've got more people that have come in. I'll be happy to sign more books, and we'll be here for at least another hour visiting. So thank you for coming tonight. Thanks for having me. I've got to get